Waning Crescent Moon, welcome back to SpookyShade, where we tell stories the forest never wanted remembered. In this channel, we don't just tell ghost stories. We unearth them. We follow whispers that lead too deep. And we ask the questions no one survives asking twice. Candle, this is part 2 of our original horror saga, Yakshini, the Forest That Devours. Aranya is no longer just a girl lost in the jungle. She is now part of its memory, part of something far older, far more patient, and far more hungry than she ever imagined. Tonight, the story leaves the trail and follows the roots beneath names, blood, and silence. So turn down the lights, put your headphones on, and remember, the jungle doesn't take you, it remembers you. Let's continue the descent. Part 2, the Forest Devours. The trees had stopped whispering, but the stone had started. Far beneath the city of Chandigarh, in tunnels abandoned since colonial times, a team of municipal engineers descended to investigate a low-frequency sound, one that had been vibrating through the bedrock for 6 consecutive nights. At first, they thought it was seismic, some minor tectonic shift, a gas pocket, the usual theories. But then came the echoes. Not natural, not mechanical, organic, like something breathing. Ravi Sharma, head of structural maintenance, didn't believe in spirits. He believed in infrastructure, pipes, heat, rust. But tonight, the air felt wrong. Too humid, too still, and the sound, whatever it was, seemed to be following them. As his team entered the deepest tunnel, he paused by an old maintenance hatch. His flashlight flickered, caught on something on the wall. He stepped closer. Someone had scrawled a word into the concrete using a nail or something sharp. Yakshini. He didn't recognize it, but something inside him shuddered. He reached out to touch the carving. The moment his fingers made contact, the wall pulsed. And then it opened. Above ground, miles away, Aranya opened her eyes. She was no longer in Bharatpur. She didn't remember traveling, but she stood now on the balcony of a high-rise building, overlooking a forest of metal and light. The city, the forest had brought her here. It moved through her now, a slow, deliberate expansion. Every alley she passed, every shadowed garden, every whisper in the rain carried her name now. Something ancient was moving beneath the concrete, and she was its messenger. In a reflection from a window, she caught her own face and stopped. Her eyes were darker, not black, not yet, but like something had rooted in her irises. And beneath her skin, veins shimmered with golden light, like sap flowing beneath bark. A new forest was blooming, but it would not grow quietly. Not this time. The first death came 2 days later. A woman in her 40s, working late at a government office near Sector 22. She'd been on the phone, speaking calmly to her husband, until her voice abruptly stopped. When they found her, the door was locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, just her body collapsed beside the desk, and roots growing from her mouth, her eyes, her fingertips, as if she'd been planted there. Her last voicemail was just static, but if one listened closely, deep within the distortion, they would hear a voice whispering, "Aranya." In the early hours of that same morning, Aranya stood at a fountain in Rose Garden. The water had gone black. Children's laughter echoed in the empty space, though no one was around. And at her feet, flowers wilted, then bloomed, then died again. A constant cycle, an accelerated ecosystem. She knelt, touching the surface of the water. It rippled, but not outward. It rippled toward her. She felt them waking. The old roots. Urban life had buried much, but not deep enough. Beneath the pavement and the sewage lines, beneath the cell towers and glass buildings, the soil remembered. And in the soil was memory. In memory was blood. And in blood was her. Far below, in the tunnel where Ravi Sharma had vanished, the wall had closed again. His team never found him. Only his hard hat, still warm, still pulsing. The authorities began to investigate, but the symptoms were uncategorized. People weren't just dying. They were transforming. Their veins turned green. Their eyes became cloudy. Some began whispering in forgotten dialects, and others wandered into the parks barefoot, stood still for hours, then disappeared. None returned. At the center of it all, a girl in a white dress, walking through markets, metros, and mosques. No one remembered her face, but everyone remembered the feeling she left behind. A dream of trees growing through their homes, a lullaby with no origin, and the taste of flowers in their mouth when they awoke. One night, the monsoon came early. a torrential rain that flooded drains and brought snakes from the earth. Aranya stood in the center of an abandoned overpass, eyes turned to the sky. She opened her mouth and sang. No one knew where the song came from, but across the city, people woke up screaming, clutching their chests, their mouths full of soil. They dreamed of roots in their lungs, of hands in the dark, wrapping gently around their throats, of a woman with bark for skin and a crown of thorns, whispering, "You forgot me, but I did not forget you." By morning, 7 more were missing. The news called it mass hysteria. The scientists called it fungal psychosis. But in Barivpur, old Modi sat at her doorstep, watching the birds refuse to fly. She muttered one word, "Bride," and wept. The city didn't sleep anymore. Not truly. People closed their windows, locked their doors, and whispered prayers to gods they barely believed in. But something older than belief moved through the cracks. It slithered up from drains. It hung between buildings. It bloomed from the forgotten places, the disused stairwells, the alleys choked with roots, the metro stations that hadn't seen trains in years. And it whispered, "She is not alone." At first, they thought it was imitation. A teenage girl found in a mall bathroom, eyes rolled back, humming a song that made every plant in the building begin to twist toward her. Another at a hospital, who smiled through her oxygen mask before her 4 lines turned green and began to sprout. One at a temple, one in a schoolyard, one who emerged from the Yamuna River naked and unscarred, though she'd been missing for 10 days. Each claimed to be called. Each repeated the same phrase. "The forest knows my name." Aranya watched them from afar. She didn't summon them. She didn't have to. The bloodline was awakening. It wasn't a family. It was a network, dormant, broken, scattered across generations and borders. Now, it was healing itself, drawing them together, calling them home. They came to her in dreams first, then in person. 6 women, each from a different walk of life. A street singer, a nurse, a blind sculptor, a prisoner, a widow, and a girl who had never spoken aloud before in her life. When they stood before Aranya beneath the banyan tree growing in the middle of the city's oldest plaza, none of them spoke. They just knelt, and the vines around the plaza moved in approval. That night, the sky turned red. Not with blood, with blossoms. Thousands of flowers that didn't belong to any known tree bloomed across rooftops, phone towers, temples. And from each flower, a voice sang, "Bride, bride, bride." The news stations tried to spin it as a botanical anomaly. The government issued silence protocols. The military quarantined 3 sectors. None of it mattered, because the forest wasn't outside anymore. It was beneath their feet, and now it had 7 brides. The Yakshini did not move alone. Deep underground, in the tunnel where Ravi Sharma had vanished, vines parted to reveal something new. A root chamber shaped like a womb, beating slowly. At its center, 7 thrones made of stone and bark. Only one was filled, but now the second began to bloom. They thought the city was untouchable. Steel, concrete, glass, a monument to mankind's dominance over nature. But concrete cracks, steel rusts, and glass remembers. Inside Sector 9's central data hub, technicians began reporting a strange error in the AI prediction system. A deep learning surveillance algorithm, meant to flag unusual public behavior, had started generating patterns they couldn't explain. Not crimes, not anomalies, but movements, converging, expanding, like roots. The system named the pattern, bride_7.sys. No one knew who programmed it. No one could delete it. Aranya stood in front of a skyscraper of mirrored glass. She stared at her reflection, but it wasn't hers anymore. The glass shimmered, and behind her image, 6 other faces appeared. The 6 brides. Their eyes glowed softly, like embers burning behind water. Then a 7th face emerged, blurry, shifting, undefined. Someone missing. Someone coming. The skyscraper's windows rippled and shattered from the inside out. No explosion, no sound, just pressure, like a heartbeat too deep to hear. At that same moment, underground, the root chamber pulsed again. The 2nd throne had bloomed. The 3rd began to crack. The others stirred in anticipation. Something beneath the glass and data and power lines was alive now, and it was sinking. The 6 brides moved in silence across the city. No phones, no cars. They appeared in places moments before disaster. A child nearly hit by a bus was pulled back by a hand that wasn't there. A fire started in a laundry shop and extinguished itself after a woman in white passed the doorway. They were not spirits. They were not saviors. They were conduits. And through them, Aranya spoke. But not with words. With wind. With static. With silence in crowded streets. People began to dream of forests inside buildings. Of vines crawling through their televisions. Of elevators that opened onto jungles. Of mouths full of leaves. And always, always, of a song just beyond hearing. She is coming. She is already here. In Barovpur, the banyan tree cracked down its trunk. From inside, something climbed out. Skin of ash. Eyes of earth. Not Aranya, but something older. Something waiting for her permission to walk again. The throne sat untouched for centuries. Even when the forest bloomed again. Even when Aranya placed her blood upon the urn. Even as 6 thrones came alive in root and bone. The 7th remained silent. It had no vines, no pulse, no name, just a deep, impossible stillness, as if it waited not for worship, but for release. Now it stirred. The cavern beneath the city trembled as cracks spread through the final throne like spiderwebs in stone. From its base, black sap oozed upward, thick and slow, etching ancient symbols as it climbed. Symbols that did not belong to the Yakshini. Symbols that even the roots avoided. In a hospital near the edge of Sector 17, a girl who had been in a coma for 8 years sat up in bed. No alarm sounded. No nurse came. She stood, barefoot, and walked to the window. Outside, vines curled through the electrical lines. She smiled, then whispered a single word. Him. In the old village temple of Barovpur, the statue of the first Yakshini cracked down the middle. And behind it, another idol was revealed. This one faceless, horned, covered in vines that had grown not from roots, but from human tongues, dried and twisted into prayer knots. No one had carved it. It had grown. Aranya felt it. In her bones. In her blood. A pressure. A hunger. Not hers. Not the forest's. Something deeper. Something older than soil. The forest had awakened with her. But now, something beneath the forest was waking too. She stood above the city on an overpass where no cars moved anymore. The other 6 brides stood in silence around her. Rain fell, heavy and hot. Lightning spidered across the sky in red arcs. "Do you feel it?" she asked. They nodded. Each of them had dreamt the same thing. A throne of mouths. A heartbeat like footsteps. And a figure bound in bark and bone, whispering to be remembered. Aranya closed her eyes. And for the first time, she sang his name. The 7th throne shattered. From beneath the city, a sound rose. Not a scream, not a roar, but a chant. A chorus of thousands of voices that had no bodies. Words that carried no language. Just intent. The power to change what had already lived. To rewrite trees, rivers, history itself. The city above shook. Glass cracked. Birds fell from the sky. Dogs howled and ran in circles until they dropped dead. Every traffic light blinked the same pattern. 7, 7, 7. And then it stopped. Silence. Aranya opened her eyes. And in the place where nothing had stood moments before, a man, naked, antlered, covered in bark that bled. Not quite human. Not quite divine. His eyes were holes. His chest was hollow. And inside it, a forest burned upside down. He looked at Aranya. He smiled without lips. And she understood. The Yakshini was never alone. She was never first. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every movement of his body sent vibrations through the earth, as if the roots themselves were listening. Aranya stood before him, eyes wide, heart still. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't ready, either. The 6 brides stepped back, unspoken instinct. Not in fear, but in reverence. The being was not like them, not born of blood and bark, but of something more primordial. He stepped forward. The ground cracked beneath each step, not from weight, but from memory, old, buried truths rupturing like ancient clay vessels. Aranya could feel it in the air. This was no god, no demon, no spirit. This was a pattern, a principle, a seed that had waited until the soil was ripe with grief and blood. He approached Aranya and knelt, not in submission, but in recognition. Their gazes met. His voice bloomed inside her skull like a tree cracking through concrete. "You opened the gate. You awakened her. But I was always beneath." Her knees buckled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what now pulsed through her veins. Images rushed in. A time before forests had names. A people who carved gods from famine. A woman who loved the trees. A man who fed them with her. "You called me," he said, "though you didn't know my name." "What are you?" Aranya whispered. "I am her root, her echo, her answer to the betrayal of time." The brides knelt now, one by one. Even the wind stopped. He stood once more and reached into his chest, into the forest burning upside down, and pulled out something impossible. A seed made of bone and blood, wrapped in vines that writhed like serpents. He held it out. "Plant me." Aranya took the seed. Her hands burned. Her mind cracked. But she did not collapse, because she had been chosen not to inherit, but to begin again. The moment she placed the seed into the cracked concrete at her feet, the city screamed. Buildings shook. Water flowed in reverse. In the metro tunnels, roots tore through steel, searching for lungs to wrap around. In offices, people convulsed at their desks, whispering words they'd never learned. He has risen. The seventh walks. She is no longer alone. Far away, in forgotten temples and sealed vaults, ancient murals bled fresh paint. Images of a twin deity, one veiled in flowers, the other crowned in thorns. Together, they stood over a burning city, their hands held open, not in mercy, but in invitation. Above ground, thunder cracked in a perfect circle over the skyline. The moon turned copper, and on every building that had mirrored glass, the reflection changed. No longer the city, but a forest. And in the forest, Aranya stood beside him. Two sovereigns, two hungers, and one purpose: to make the world remember what it tried to bury. The morning after the copper moon, the sky did not turn blue. It remained gray, heavy with unfallen rain and something waiting in the air. The city had not collapsed, but it no longer belonged to itself. Its heart had shifted, and its new rulers did not wear crowns. They walked barefoot. Aranya and the seventh stood on the rooftop of a hotel once owned by a foreign mining corporation. Now, vines had swallowed the elevator shaft, and birds nested inside the boardroom. Beneath their feet, the city pulsed. In hospitals, patients whispered lullabies they'd never been taught. In kindergartens, children drew trees with faces. In train stations, commuters stared at walls as if something behind the concrete was breathing. The transformation was not loud. It was slow, like rot beneath wallpaper, but it was everywhere. The brides had spread, not in groups, in pairs, north, south, east, west, up, down. They seeded temples and tenements, corporate towers and construction sites, each of them a conduit, each carrying within them not just the forest's will, but its memory. Meanwhile, he, the one who had waited, moved through the oldest districts, where the roads had been built atop bones, where churches were erected after sacred groves were raised, where the maps still called places by names no living person remembered, where the first forgetting had happened. He walked these places like a man, but wherever his bare feet touched, the land remembered its anger and bloomed. Aranya sat beneath a banyan that now grew atop a parking garage. Her hands were covered in red sap. Not blood, not exactly. She was writing, not in any language taught in schools, but in the script of memory, lines that curved like branches and nested like birds. She wrote names: forgotten girls, burned women, midwives who knew too much, daughters who bled for gods they never prayed to. As each name was etched into the page, somewhere in the city, a seed cracked open, and someone remembered. But not everyone surrendered. Not yet. Far across the city, in a government facility labeled Natural Vector Containment, Zone A, a woman named Dr. Neha Kothari watched satellite imagery on mute. She had been tracking the root patterns. She didn't believe in magic, but she did believe in invasive biology. What she saw terrified her more than any pathogen, because the pattern wasn't random. It was structured, symmetrical, deliberate, like the city was being turned into a glyph, a ritual. She turned to her assistant and said, "If we don't stop it now, it won't just consume Chandigarh." "Then what?" he asked. "Then it spreads through memory itself." And above them all, in the air that no longer belonged to birds, the forest listened. It had waited long enough. Now it had two voices, and they would sing until the concrete cracked open like fruit. The city no longer held its own name. It was not Chandigarh now. It was something else, something that could no longer be said in one breath. The forest had renamed it, not with language, but with roots, blood, and memory. And through every broken window, every humming wire, every child's dream, it whispered that name. Tapernava, the place of remembering. Aranya sat in a circle of fireflies. Not literal, they were fragments of memory, alive and pulsing. Each light flickered with a name, an event, a scream, a silence. She no longer needed to speak aloud. The city listened through thought. She closed her eyes, and the names came. Asha bled to death in childbirth because the priest said no medicine should be used. Mina burned alive for bearing a daughter. Jaya vanished after asking who wrote the village laws. Their names were not prayers. They were weapons, and each one woke a part of the forest that had gone dormant. Beneath the science complex in Zone A, Dr. Neha Kothari stood in front of a wall of screens. Each showed a part of the city, and in every image, vegetation was following human movement. Not random, targeted. "You see it, right?" she said aloud. Her assistant nodded, pale. "They're not spreading. They're gathering." She highlighted the movement patterns. All roads, old and new, seemed to spiral inward toward one point, right beneath the original banyan tree in Bharavpur. But that wasn't the epicenter anymore. The new one was mobile. A woman. "We need to erase her," Neha said, almost to herself. "Not kill. Erase." The assistant swallowed hard. "Like brain erasure? Psyop." "No," Neha said. She zoomed in on the latest satellite image. It showed Aranya standing in the middle of a school playground. The children had drawn chalk circles around her feet, unprompted. "No one ever draws the Yakshini," Neha whispered. "They draw around her, because they feel her, but they forget her." She paused. "We need to make her a ghost again." But ghosts do not sleep. That night, Neha dreamed of a banyan growing inside her stomach, of roots in her teeth, of a voice whispering from inside her bones. "I know your mother's name. She was mine before she was yours." She woke screaming and coughing up leaves. Elsewhere, Aranya walked through the memory market. It wasn't called that. Not officially. It was an old electronics bazaar, mostly abandoned. But now, vendors traded in items no one remembered losing. Old earrings, wedding photos, dolls, bones, all labeled in handwritten notes. "Whose is this? Does this name belong to you? Did your grandmother forget her own mother?" Aranya passed the stalls in silence. Wherever she stepped, the forgotten things lit up. And where she stood still, the vines returned, not to consume, but to archive. Because the ritual of names was not a purge. It was a restoration. To a time before forgetting became survival. To a time when even the dead were remembered by the soil. And as the brides circled the city, and the seventh walked in the cracks of foundation lines, the name spread, not from mouth to ear, but from dream to dream, until even those who fought the forest spoke it in their sleep. It started with the clocks. One by one, across the city, they stopped at 4:17 a.m., a strange hour, neither night nor morning, the hour when even dreams lose their direction. At that moment, every person still asleep began to dream the same dream. In the dream, there was no traffic, no sirens, no smog, only trees, not the kind that line highways, but ones older than roads. They grew from the windows of apartments, from drain pipes, from the mouths of statues long forgotten. The roots carried memories, and the wind carried her song. A low hum, ancient syllables, a rhythm that felt like blood rising in the throat. Children dreamed of playing hide and seek in a jungle that whispered their names. Old men dreamed of walking through alleys that no longer existed, guided by vines that knew where their wives were buried. Women dreamed of fire made of flowers, blooming across rooftops. And all of them, every single one, saw her. A girl with bark beneath her skin, and eyes like storm clouds over a river. She said nothing, but every dreamer woke with her name on their lips. Aranya. By noon, her name had been searched 200,000 times. By evening, it was banned on all official networks. By nightfall, it was spoken in every whisper. And in places where the city forgot itself, moss began to grow. Dr. Neha Kothari sat in a sterile lab, reviewing blood work. Every subject exposed to Aranya's presence showed the same anomaly. Inverted DNA spirals, neural pruning reversal, memory convergence across individuals. "What the hell are we looking at?" her colleague asked. Neha didn't answer, because in that moment, she forgot his name, and when she looked down at her notes, She had written Aranya 17 times without realizing it. The city's power grid flickered that night, not from overload, but from synchronization. Heartbeats matched, breath patterns aligned. A single pulse moved through everything, like a sleeper rolling over in bed. The city was dreaming, and Aranya was the dream. In the roots beneath the banyan, the seventh sat in stillness, eyes closed, smiling, because the ritual was working, not by force, but by invitation. The people didn't worship Aranya. They simply remembered her too clearly to deny her anymore. And in a world obsessed with forgetting, that was power beyond death. One man tried to leave the city. He drove for 8 hours. But when he stopped for gas, he realized the signs had changed. The map had looped. And the woman at the counter simply said, "She's waiting." He never returned. But the vines did, growing from the back seat of his car. Every road now led inward. It didn't matter where people began, which route they took, which turn they avoided. Eventually, they came to her, to the place that wasn't marked on any GPS, where phone signals died, where even birds refused to fly overhead. Locals called it Sector Black, but no official record named it. It was a place of repetition and forgetting, a street that always turned back on itself, a park that never ended, a building that seemed to breathe, and in its heart, Aranya stood. She was barefoot now, no longer needed to walk. The vines moved with her breath. The air shifted with her thoughts. And above her, the sky cracked, not with thunder, but with veins, as if the atmosphere had begun to mirror her flesh. People didn't know how they got there. They would walk to work, to a shop, to a station, and find themselves instead in Sector Black, face to face with her. Some wept, some collapsed, some simply remembered their mother's voice and knelt. Aranya never spoke, but in their minds bloomed a single phrase: "You have returned to the root." Inside the emergency command center, Dr. Neha Kothari watched satellite footage that no longer obeyed geometry. Streets folded, bridges split, entire city blocks vanished from view, and then reappeared with trees growing through their windows. "What are we looking at?" someone asked. She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was not scientific. It was symbolic. She whispered to herself, "The forest isn't expanding. It's remembering." She activated protocol, Crossline, a failsafe designed to overwrite all external signal traffic and lock GPS back into a fixed grid. The system blinked. "Access denied." A phrase appeared on every terminal. In Sanskrit, King Chidvi Wisrithing na Bhavi. Nothing, once remembered, stays dead. The lights went out, and somewhere, deep beneath the building, roots burst through the floor. Meanwhile, in a shopping mall long since abandoned, the seventh throne bloomed in full. A man in a security guard's uniform watched the walls peel open like petals. Inside was no chamber, just a mirror made of polished root. And from its surface, his own face stared back, smiling, but not moving. It opened its mouth and said, "There is no map. There is only memory." He screamed, but no one heard. Aranya knelt beneath the banyan, now fully grown through the heart of the old railway station. She touched the ground, and the ground sighed. A tremor rippled across the city. Not destruction, a pulse. Not down, but outward, as if the city itself had exhaled a name. Aranya, Yakshini, the seventh, and far, far away, in a country that had forgotten where its forests once stood, an old woman opened her eyes in her sleep. She had not dreamed in 30 years. But now she whispered, with tears running down her cheeks. "She is rewriting the world." It was never meant to be used. The protocol had no name in official records. No file. No timestamp. Just a whispered code name among security architects and cognitive engineers. The anti-ritual. A ritual not to remember, but to erase. To cauterize memory from culture. To burn symbols from the subconscious. To kill a god by forgetting it ever lived. Dr. Neha Kothari stood in the center of a blacked-out chamber beneath the central PSYOPs compound, surrounded by 5 others. Linguists, neurotheorists, pattern coders. All wore white. All were silent. A chalk circle surrounded them, inscribed not with glyphs of protection, but with absence. Words were not allowed inside this ritual. Only intention. Before them sat a console with one button. Just one. Labeled Cradle Reset, Lucid Blind. To press it would trigger a city-wide mnemonic inversion field, wiping emotional imprints associated with any single symbolic node, starting with the name. Aranya. If successful, the forest would collapse into noise. The brides would wander lost. The root net would wither from the base. And the seventh, he who waited beneath, would return to his void. But it came with a cost. The erasure won't be selective, Neha said. We lose her, but we also lose everything she brought back. Good, one man replied. No, whispered another. That includes us, too. Our mothers, our languages, our ancestral guilt. Exactly, Neha said. It's not salvation. It's surgery. At 4:17 a.m., the exact moment all clocks had died weeks before, Neha raised her hand. She pressed the button. The world shuddered. Above ground, the banyan tree cracked. The brides fell to their knees, screaming in pain, not physical, but conceptual. Their names unraveled from them. Their roots retreated. The forest forgot its own hunger. And Aranya stood very still. She looked around the memory market, now dissolving. Photos turning to blank paper. Bones crumbling to dust. Children forgetting the games they played the day before. She touched a vine, and it withered. Far underground, the seventh roared, not in anger, but in recognition. This was the real war. Not tooth against tooth, but memory against silence. But Neha hadn't planned for one thing. One inversion echo. A child. A small girl in Sector 5 who had once seen Aranya's reflection in a puddle. She had drawn her over and over again. On walls. On glass. On her own skin. And now, as the ritual burned across the city, she sat cross-legged in the dust of her crumbling apartment and whispered the name one more time. Aranya. The chalk circle in the chamber cracked. Blood spilled from the coders' noses. The console blinked erratically, and somewhere in the spiraling collapse of data, a root surged back through the cracks. A word reformed in the dust. A name. A map. A pulse. The forest remembered itself. And at the edge of the broken city, with smoke and ash rising from where dreams had been buried, Aranya smiled. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You cannot kill what makes you real. The sky was no longer gray. It was clear, but not empty. Above the ruined city, clouds drifted like torn pages, and between them shimmered threads of memory, gold and green, unraveling across the skyline like veins across the back of a dying god's hand. The city had not died. It had molted. What stood in its place was not Chandigarh, not Tapernava, not a city at all, but a remembering. Ash lay thick on every surface, not from fire, but from burnt names. The anti-ritual had collapsed under its own weight, and now the echoes it tried to bury had roots. Aranya stood atop the skeleton of the metro station, barefoot in dust. Her skin no longer bled. It blossomed. Veins of bark ran through her arms, and her eyes had no pupils, just the reflection of branches in infinite sky. She no longer spoke with her mouth. She spoke with wind, and the wind spoke to everyone. You tried to burn the forest, but the forest is not firewood. It is what remains after the fire. All 6 brides stood behind her, hands outstretched. Their palms held soil, and in the soil, teeth, names, and seeds. One by one, they knelt and pressed their hands into the cracked earth. And from each point, a tree erupted, not upward, but outward, twisting through memory. Across countries, across tongues, across silence, the seventh emerged from beneath the surface, his bark skin cracked with luminous white sap. He had not spoken since the anti-ritual, but now, he stood beside Aranya, and in unison, they whispered the last rite. To remember is to bloom. To forget is to burn. Let the world bloom in what it buried. And the city bloomed. From foundations. From mouths. From forgotten mass graves. Not in death, but in reckoning. Those who had clung to silence now found it splitting inside them. They could no longer say it never happened. They could no longer say she was never here. They could no longer say that forest is gone. Because she was the forest, and she had inherited the ash. In the final hour, Dr. Neha Kothari stood in the center of the data center, surrounded by dying monitors. She activated one last failsafe, a single digital slate. She looked at the interface and paused. Instead of pressing delete, she typed a name, not hers, but her mother's, and then her grandmother's. And when she reached the third name, her hands stopped shaking. She whispered, "I remember you," and wept. The city did not roar. It did not collapse. It simply settled, like a body that no longer needs to fight the fever. In Sector Black, Where the city's name had once been carved, the concrete bloomed with moss. And in the moss was etched, "We are what they buried, and we have grown teeth." The city had no voice left, not because it was silenced, but because it had no mouth left to scream. Where once there were billboards and sirens and slogans, there were now vines shaped like tongues and whispers that ran beneath the concrete like wires. People did not speak of what happened. They did not know how to speak of it, because what had changed them had no word. Only feeling, only soil. The skyscrapers were still standing, but they leaned, ever so slightly, toward the banyan tree that grew in the city's heart, as if bowing. The highways still spiraled outward, but no vehicle drove them anymore. They were routes now, highways of memory, leading into places long forgotten. And in the silence that remained, a truth crystallized. This was no longer a city. It was a wound that chose not to close. Aranya no longer walked. She drifted, her shape flickering between bark, smoke, and silhouette. No one saw her directly anymore, but they felt her. In the pause before saying a name they thought they'd forgotten. In the wait behind lullabies whose lyrics had no language. In the shudder when they looked into mirrors and saw trees behind them. She was no longer one woman. She was the answer to a question they buried in silence. The seventh no longer spoke. He had returned to the deep, but his thrones remained. And at the base of each one, a new seed slept. Waiting, the brides wandered freely. They tended to places no longer marked on maps. A school where every child remembered dreams their ancestors once died for. A clinic where bones refused to rot. A plaza where no birds flew, but feathers fell every morning. The world was healing, not through repair, but through remembrance. Outside the city, those who had fled tried to tell stories. But every time they said Aranya, their voices cracked. Every time they said forest, their breath failed. Every time they said, we were spared, their dreams bled leaves onto their pillows. They knew now. Forgetting was not survival. Forgetting was a curse. And in the ruins of the central PSYOPs building, the last monitor flickered. Not static, but an image. A girl with roots for veins. A city blooming behind her. And a phrase in every language at once. You buried us to silence us. But roots only grow deeper in the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried. Not in fear, but in recognition. End of part 2, The Forest Devours.